He never looked the part. That much was obvious. While others spent their mornings adjusting collars and shining shoes, he focused on function, coffee, code, clarity. His wardrobe was a collection of clean hoodies, fitted jeans, and worn sneakers that had carried him through 100 late-night breakthroughs. He didn't dress for attention. He dressed for work. And in the world he was trying to build, results were supposed to matter more than appearances. But the world didn't work that way. Not yet. He had spent years building in the background. Not chasing funding, not chasing fame, just solving real problems for real people. His first app wasn't glamorous. It streamlined logistics for small delivery businesses, route optimization, real-time traffic analysis, fuel tracking. It wasn't sexy. It was useful. And it spread. Quietly. Relentlessly. He didn't care about headlines. He cared about stability. But when his product started getting noticed by bigger players, he knew he would have to step into their world. That meant meetings, pitches, rooms designed to test not just ideas but image. He hated those rooms. Not because he feared rejection, but because he already knew what would happen. They wouldn't see him. Not truly. They'd see the hoodie, the lack of polish, the refusal to perform the costume of wealth. But he went anyway, because he had to. The company was on the brink of scaling beyond his current capacity. He needed capital. Not a lot. Just enough to build infrastructure, hire key talent, and stabilize his growth curve. He prepared everything, his pitch, his models, his product roadmap. He rehearsed for hours. He could speak their language. He just didn't want to wear their uniform. The office was downtown, glass, steel, and mirrored status. Everyone who walked in looked like a mannequin from the same store. He stood out before he even introduced himself. But he smiled, nodded, sat down calmly in the waiting area with his laptop and demo screens ready. The receptionist asked if he was delivering something. He said no. Said he had a meeting. She raised an eyebrow, checked the list again. Her smile turned stiff. Please wait here. He waited. When the associate arrived, he glanced at his shoes first. Then the hoodie. Then the backpack. You're here for the pitch? Yes. A pause. The associate didn't hide the look. The meeting was shorter than it should have been. They didn't ask about user growth, or revenue, or retention. They asked about his background, his experience with leadership culture. One of them even asked, "Do you see yourself as the kind of founder people can take seriously?" He showed them the product anyway. The app ran flawlessly. The metrics were strong. The feedback loops clean. The scalability obvious. But they were already leaning back in their chairs, already closing the file in their minds. At the end, one of them gave a polite smile and said the words he'd remember for months. "You've got something interesting. But let's be honest. You're nobody without a suit." He left the building quietly. Didn't argue. Didn't defend. Just walked back to his apartment, opened his laptop, and began rewriting his next sprint. He didn't need their money. He needed time. And time was something he could control. The rejection didn't burn, it focused him. While they moved back into their meetings and martinis, he moved back into the trenches. He didn't waste time replaying the moment in his mind. He knew what they saw when he walked in. A developer, not a leader. A builder, not a brand. They didn't read his projections. They measured his sleeves. They didn't weigh his traction. They measured his collar. He stopped trying to convince them. Instead, he went back to the people who had been with him from the beginning, small business owners, logistics operators, warehouse dispatchers. The ones who didn't care what he wore, only that his product worked. He doubled down on user feedback, added features they actually wanted, trimmed the fat. His growth accelerated. He applied for a microgrant from a nonprofit tech incubator and got it. It wasn't much, but enough to bring on 2 part-time engineers. One fresh out of college. One recently laid off from a bloated unicorn that imploded under its own branding. Both wore sneakers to their first meeting. Both stayed after hours because they believed in what he was building. They didn't need a boss in a suit. They needed a compass. By the 3rd month, revenue doubled, then tripled. His code was clean, but his numbers were cleaner. Then the calls started coming. Not from investors, from competitors. Bigger apps, bloated with VC cash and overdesigned dashboards, began feeling the pinch. Their clients were jumping ship slowly, but measurably. His product didn't offer flash. It offered reliability, simplicity, consistency. One of those companies reached out with a partnership offer. He said no. Another tried to poach his engineers. They refused, because loyalty can't be bought when it's built on vision instead of vanity. Meanwhile, the firm that told him he wasn't a fit launched a marketing campaign that mirrored features he had released 2 quarters earlier. They'd seen his updates. They weren't subtle about it. But while they chased image, he chased outcomes. 6 months after the rejection, his app hit a milestone. 10,000 paid users. He celebrated by buying a whiteboard, not for press quotes, for new architecture diagrams. Because while others fought for attention, he fought for clarity. He started getting requests for acquisition. Lowball offers at first, disguised as partnerships. He ignored them, kept building. Then, in a quiet week in the middle of Q3, his CTO came in with a smirk. Guess who's running out of runway? The firm that laughed at his hoodie was now bleeding talent. Their churn rate had spiked. Their funding round had collapsed. And their COO had resigned. He didn't laugh. He just opened his notebook and circled one word: timing. That week, he incorporated a holding company under a new name. It wasn't for expansion. It was for acquisition. Because sometimes you don't need to prove you belong in the room. You just need to wait until the room is for sale. He didn't rush the offer. He never did. Everything he built was deliberate, no noise, no wasted motion. He had been watching them for months now, reading every shift in their messaging, every pivot disguised as strategy. The cracks were widening. Layoffs came in waves. Their public roadmap slowed. Their once cocky social media accounts went dark. The firm had lost its grip on the narrative. But worse, they had lost the product. Clients whispered about bugs, glitches, delays. Nothing catastrophic, just enough to build doubt. Enough for users to start looking elsewhere. And what they found was him. Simpler, cheaper, smarter. No ad campaign needed. Just results. He'd seen it before, companies that built their reputation on aesthetic, not infrastructure. The moment the curtain fell, there was nothing behind it but a borrowed suit and a fragile smile. He spent 3 weeks preparing the acquisition proposal. It wasn't a power play. It was a business decision. His team handled the legal shell. His advisors calculated the offer. Every clause was intentional. No golden parachutes. No ceremonial seats. No promises of keeping the old name. Just the offer. He sent it on a Thursday afternoon. 2 days later, they called. The voice on the other end was quieter now. Measured. It belonged to someone who once told him, flatly, that he didn't look like someone who belonged at the table. Now he owned the table. They asked for a meeting. Not to negotiate, just to understand. He said yes. And this time he didn't change clothes. He walked into the same building, same glass doors, same lobby. Security didn't question him. The receptionist knew now, greeted him without hesitation. No pause. No side-eye. Upstairs, the room looked almost identical to the one he'd been rejected in. Except now they stood when he entered. He didn't sit right away. He scanned the space. Not out of intimidation, but to take it in. To feel, for just a moment, the full circle of it all. The silence carried weight. No one dared mention the hoodie. No one commented on the sneakers. All they did was wait. He opened a folder. Laid out the numbers. No arrogance. No performance. The math spoke for itself. He told them what would happen next. Streamlined leadership, absorbed infrastructure, clean transition. No brand revival. No legacy preservation. Just a better product under better leadership with no room left for pretense. One of them, the same man who'd once said he'd never invest in someone who didn't dress like they belonged, asked a question. Not about terms. About why. Why him? Why now? Why this? Andre didn't answer right away. Because he didn't need to. The answer was already written across every line of code. Every happy customer. Every loyal engineer who stayed when others left. The answer was, because while they were dressing for the part, he was building the future. He stood, nodded once, and walked out. The signatures would come later. The headlines wouldn't follow. He wouldn't make the cover of any magazines. But by the end of that week, his name would be etched into the ownership documents of the very company that once told him he needed a suit to matter. And he still didn't wear one. The deal closed with barely a sound. No press release, no handshakes in front of cameras, no celebratory champagne. Just a file transfer, a wire confirmation, and a single line of text. Transaction complete. With that, the company that once dismissed him now answered to him. Every executive who questioned his worth was now under contract to fulfill his vision or leave. He didn't walk into his new role with theatrics. He walked in with a clipboard. First, he removed the layers that slowed everything down. Empty titles, redundant approvals, siloed departments. He restructured management not with firings, but with redirection. Those who added value stayed. Those who couldn't adapt to the new culture, where output beat optics, quietly exited. No meetings, no drama, just reassignment, then replacement. He knew what needed fixing because he had once seen it from the outside. The first thing he changed was the dress code. He removed it, completely, not to make a point, to remove a barrier. Professionalism was no longer defined by pressed collars or tailored seams. It was defined by clarity, respect, delivery. Some people resisted. They dressed the same anyway, hoping the illusion of control would hold. Others showed up in clean sneakers and loose hoodies. But something strange happened. Productivity didn't drop. Meetings didn't devolve into chaos. The work actually got better. People breathed. He walked the floors not as a CEO, but as a presence. He didn't sit in the corner office. He didn't ask for a new chair. He worked from wherever made sense. The break room, the window ledge, a standing desk in the engineering bullpen. He didn't hover. He just existed where the work was happening. And the work responded. Designs improved. Communication flowed. Deadlines weren't feared, they were anticipated. But the most important shift was unseen. Trust. He gave his team trust without asking them to perform for it. He didn't demand fake confidence. He didn't require endless justification. He let their work prove them right. And it did. One morning, he overheard a junior dev explaining a system to someone 3 levels above them. No fear, no filter, just clarity. The senior nodded, asked questions, listened. That was the culture now. No more tiptoeing around status. The investors noticed the numbers, but they didn't understand the engine. They saw retention rise, churn drop, product reviews surge. They didn't see the hoodie in the hallway, the quiet questions in kitchens, the skipped elevator rides in favor of stairwell conversations. They didn't see him bring in contractors from neighborhoods they'd never hired from. They didn't see him take meetings in coffee shops instead of boardrooms. They didn't see the way he built systems where no one had to pretend to be anything but who they were. Late one night, he sat alone in the old boardroom. The same one where he'd been rejected. Now empty, echoing. He didn't sit at the head of the table. He stood, looked around, and smiled. Because the company didn't need that room anymore. It had outgrown it. By month 5, the transformation was no longer quiet. Clients started talking. Not in testimonials crafted by marketing teams, but in honest reviews, in organic referrals, in conversations that couldn't be bought. They noticed something different about the company. It wasn't just the product, it was the energy. Faster response times, human support, clearer communication. Something real had replaced the polished shell they had known before. Andre didn't take credit. He didn't need to. His name was buried deep in the admin fields of internal systems, not splashed across landing pages. He wasn't the face. He was the foundation. Inside, the culture had stabilized. Meetings were shorter. Goals were sharper. People showed up ready to build instead of perform. The old rituals, over-rehearsed presentations, dress rehearsals for approval were gone. In their place was focus, trust, execution. He noticed how people stopped asking permission to try new things. They just started doing them. One designer launched an internal tool that cut content production time in half. No one asked for it. She just built it. And it worked. Another engineer implemented a new caching layer without waiting for a committee vote. The speed gain was immediate. No headline, just progress. This was what he had always wanted. Not to be the star. To build a place where brilliance didn't need to dress up. But while the company was rising, the industry pushed back. An article surfaced on a mid-tier business blog. It questioned his leadership style, called it too informal, risky, not scalable. It quoted anonymous sources saying he lacked the presence of a traditional CEO. He laughed when he read it. Presence. As if that meant posture, not purpose. The piece went semi-viral. On social media, the conversation split. Some defended him. Others mocked the hoodie. Some asked why image still mattered. Others clung to the idea that a leader had to look the part. He didn't respond. He had nothing to prove. Instead, he hosted an AMA for his team. Not to address the article. To remind them that narratives don't define reality, results do. They talked about values. About what mattered now. About how success looked different for everyone. One employee shared that she used to dress up every day out of fear, not pride. Another admitted that being able to wear her natural hair in the office was the reason she stayed. That was the real ROI. Retention born from comfort. Loyalty born from freedom. And then came the call. The firm that once rejected him years before called again. Not to invest. To learn. Their CEO asked if they could schedule a meeting. Said they were struggling with their own culture shift. Said they wanted to understand how his model worked. He paused. Then agreed. Not for revenge. For evolution. When they met, he didn't hold back. He showed them everything. How trust outperforms surveillance. How comfort outpaces conformity. How the cost of inclusion is nothing compared to the profit of real talent. When the meeting ended, they asked how he'd learned to lead like this. He smiled. Said, by not being allowed to. Then he stood, hoodie and all, and walked out of the room. Because some lessons can't be taught. They have to be lived. The 6th month came without ceremony. No rebrands. No announcements. No polished campaigns. Just momentum. The kind that doesn't need celebration because it already lives in motion. The company moved with its own gravity now, steady, centered, untouchable. What once needed his constant attention now ran with rhythm. He wasn't the fire starter anymore. He was the architect. And the structure was sound. New hires came from places that were once overlooked. Community colleges. Freelance collectives. Self-taught spaces. They brought questions, not resumes. Curiosity instead of credentials. The talent pool didn't shrink, it exploded. Because now, the company didn't recruit based on how well someone could perform at an interview. It recruited based on what people could actually do once the performance ended. The board noticed the numbers, of course. Growth was up. Costs were down. Client churn had stabilized to near zero. Retention among staff had become a case study for other firms trying to figure out culture. But they still asked him the same thing every quarter. When will you go public? And every time he gave the same answer. When we're ready to stop growing and start posing. And they stopped asking. Because the return was undeniable. The success was sustainable. And the soul of the company had become its strategy. One afternoon, Andre walked through the atrium of the building he now fully owned. It was late. Most desks were empty. The lights were dimmed to save energy. Music played low in a corner where 2 designers still worked, lost in their screens. He didn't interrupt. He just walked the hallways, passing rooms that used to lock him out. He entered the old boardroom, untouched since he'd ordered it repurposed. No longer a meeting place for executives. Now it was a free co-working space for interns, fellows, and neighborhood entrepreneurs. The table was scratched. The chairs mismatched. The walls covered in whiteboard ink. Ideas stacked on top of ideas. And it was perfect. A young developer sat at the end of the table, headphones on, hoodie up, sketching logic for a new module. Andre watched for a moment before the kid looked up and smiled. Need the room? The kid asked. Andre shook his head. No, I just built it. The kid blinked, unsure whether to laugh or believe him. Andre didn't explain. He didn't need to. He left the room, letting the door swing gently behind him. Outside, the city moved as always. The world hadn't changed. Not entirely. There were still places where people measured others by what they wore. Still lobbies where success was assumed based on lapels, not legacy. But inside this building, the rules were different. He had made sure of that. He didn't wear a suit to become their boss. He became their boss so no one else would have to. And the ones who once told him he was nobody, they now answered to the structure he created. A structure that didn't ask you to look the part, just to build like you belong. Because the future doesn't care about fabric, cares about force. And Andre had always been that, quiet, relentless, unstoppable.